So the reason that we add a test cleanup and a test initialize method is we're following another automation testing best practice, which is the Hermetic test design pattern. If I haven't mentioned this before, design patterns are patterns, basically, right, ways to write code that have been developed over a long time by very smart individuals, right? We are not the first people to be running into these problems with automation testing that we're experiencing. Developers have been running into these problems for years. I think computer science has been around since the 1950s. So people created what they call design patterns to help us deal with the problems that we face every single day. And one of those design patterns is called the Hermetic test design pattern, that states that a test should be fully responsible for itself and should not be tied to any other test. So this means that the test is a single sole instance that you can run by itself without needing to run any other test, because the test does its own setup where it creates its own environment and gets its own users and whatever. It does its own teardown where it cleans everything up, and it handles its own environments and everything related to that. So basically the test is just, if you want to run the test, you can run it and it's gonna test what you need it to test without needing to do anything else. So that's why we have the setup and teardown methods, which help us to accomplish that. The opposite of that I have seen, and I discourage you from doing it, is we're gonna call this anti-patterns. One of them is called the spaghetti. An anti-pattern is something that you should not follow, where a pattern is something that you do want to follow, an anti-pattern is something that you don't. And a spaghetti anti-pattern is kind of opposed to the Hermetic test design pattern, where tests are linked to each other, right? Just like spaghetti is intertwined, right? Different strands of spaghetti are kind of randomly intertwined with other strands. The spaghetti anti-pattern does the same thing, right? Where, for example, one login test may create a user, and then the next test may use that user for updating a shopping cart, for example. And then the third test will take that shopping cart and will maybe do a checkout, right? So these tests begin to be intertwined. But if you wanted to just run the checkout functionality on its own, you can't do that, because you need to run the login and setting up the items before you run the checkout tests. And if a login test is failing, then you'll never get to test the checkout functionality. And so that's where the spaghetti anti-pattern is bad, is that because it ties all the tests together. The other issue with the spaghetti anti-pattern is that you don't get the random run order principle, which is actually another automation testing best practice, which allows you to run your tests in random orders to put the environment in different states, right? This is cool because one test may be creating a user and then using that user for a checkout. Another test may be doing a checkout and using a new user for something else. And so this random run order will put your database and your systems into different states that will test all possible different combinations. And that's very cool and very good, because your system is never going to be tested in one way but by actual users. But anyways, I'm completely off tangent here. Just love to talk about patterns and anti-patterns. So the Hermetic design pattern is going to help us make sure that each test is enclosed in its own environment and that it can always be run by itself. And we need to avoid the spaghetti anti-pattern.